The Young and the Restless spoilers. Matt's consciousness returned in fragments, like pieces of shattered glass drifting slowly back into place, each one sharper than the last. Pain throbbed through his skull in violent pulses, the kind that blurred the edges of reality until everything felt distorted, too bright, too loud, too fast. When he tried to move, a raw groan escaped his throat. His body felt wrong, heavy, stiff, as though something had dragged him out of death but forgotten to restore him fully to life. He blinked multiple times before the room around him began to take shape. Dim lights, unfamiliar walls, the sterile scent of medical supplies mixed with something colder secrecy. His last memory was a flash of metal, Nick Newman's car swerving, the shattering crunch of impact, and then darkness swallowing everything in rage and confusion. He had assumed he would wake in a hospital surrounded by police, doctors, and the weight of consequences he had long outrun. Instead, he woke somewhere hidden, somewhere intentionally isolated, somewhere under someone else's control. A figure sat quietly in the far corner of the room, almost merging with the shadows, the silhouette steady and composed in a way that felt unnatural. Matt squinted, trying to force the blur in his vision to settle. The figure moved slowly, deliberately, and stepped closer. A masked man, dressed entirely in black, carrying the cold calm of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. The mask wasn't grotesque but simple, designed to hide identity, not intimidate. The man reached out, not with hostility, but with calculated gentleness, placing a cool pack against Matt's forehead, adjusting the bandages on his arms, and checking the foreline that Matt hadn't noticed until now. Every movement was precise, professional, almost disturbingly calm. Whoever this man was, he wasn't improvising. He had done this before. Matt tried to speak but only managed a croaking whisper, his vocal cords feeling as though they had been scraped raw. The masked man didn't respond with words. Instead, he placed a finger to his lips, signaling the need for silence. Then he adjusted the pillow beneath Matt's neck, checked his pupils with a flashlight, and scribbled something on a notepad. It was surreal being treated with such attentive care by someone completely unknown, someone whose intentions were impossible to read. Matt's instincts screamed at him to remain alert, to not mistake care for kindness. But his body was too broken to resist, and exhaustion pulled him back down before he could gather more questions. Hours or maybe days past the time became a distorted shapey as the masked caretaker nursed him back from the brink. Matt's pain lessened gradually. His mind began to clear. Questions sharpened. Where am I? Who is this man? Why am I alive? He studied his caretaker's movements, the way he checked the oxygen level, reset the needles, brought water periodically, but never spoke. The silence became its own kind of tension, a waiting game where Matt was left to guess whether he'd been saved or trapped. Finally, when Matt was stable enough to sit without collapsing, the masked man stood at the foot of the bed, posture rigid, as though bracing for a shift in power. Matt prepared himself, gripping the thin blanket as the man slowly raised a hand and removed the mask. The world seemed to freeze. Jack Abbott. Matt blinked, convinced his still healing mind was playing tricks on him. Jack Abbott, Genoa City's polished businessman, the moral opposite of chaos. The self-proclaimed guardian of Abbott Legacy stood before him with a calmness that contradicted every assumption Matt once had. His expression wasn't warm or sympathetic. It was cool, razor-sharp, almost predatory. This wasn't the Jack the public saw, the man who fought Victor Newman with righteous indignation and corporate wars. This was a version stripped of restraint, a man who had stepped far past the boundary between rivalry and vengeance. Matt struggled to form the words. Why you? Jack smiled slightly, a thin curve devoid of warmth. Because, Matt, he said finally, voice steady and chilling in its conviction, I needed you alive. And I needed you free. Matt felt the floor fall out beneath him. Free. Alive. None of this made sense. Jack wasn't supposed to know him beyond passing mentions, and certainly not enough to intervene in something as chaotic as his accident with Nick. Jack watched Matt's confusion with a level of patience that felt rehearsed. Then came the revelation, delivered with the calm precision of a surgeon cutting into flesh. I arranged the accident. The words dropped like a blade, slicing through the room, through the fragile notion of safety Matt thought he had regained. His breath hitched, heart hammering against bruised ribs. Jack continued, tone unflinching. I didn't intend to harm you severely enough to create the perfect opportunity for extraction. I needed you removed from the path you were on. The police, Victor's people, even Sienna, they were closing in. You were about to be a pawn, not a player. The room spun slightly as Matt absorbed the meaning. Jack had orchestrated the crash. Nick Newman's involvement had been collateral damage or an unfortunate intersection of timing. Jack had manipulated the entire situation not to end Matt's life, but to repurpose it. The realization was intoxicating and terrifying. There were few men capable of coldly arranging such an event while maintaining composure, and Jack Abbott was one of them. Jack stepped closer, folding his arms as he studied Matt like a valuable investment. Victor Newman is tightening his grip on this town. He destroys lives, families, opportunities, futures he's done it to mine for decades. But this time, I want to strike where he doesn't expect it. I want to break his empire from the inside. And you, Matt Clark, are the key. Matt stared at him, stunned. The idea of partnering with Jack Abbott felt ludicrous on every level. They came from different worlds, different moral codes, different battles. But Jack wasn't wrong. Victor had destroyed Matt's life in ways others didn't fully understand. He had pushed him into corners, forced him into desperate decisions, labeled him a permanent enemy of Newman's stability. If there was anyone who despised Victor as deeply and personally as Matt did, it was Jack. But the audacity of the proposal made Matt uneasy. Aligning with Jack meant stepping into a war far bigger than anything he had handled before. It meant becoming a weapon in a feud older and more volatile than his own grudges. Jack didn't hide the truth. This alliance would demand loyalty, sacrifice, risk, and absolute secrecy. Victor wasn't a man you inconvenienced. He was a man you destroyed, or he destroyed you. Nat's voice trembled with skepticism. Why me? Jack didn't hesitate. Because you're unpredictable enough to be useful, but experienced enough to survive. Because Victor underestimates men like you. Because you have nothing left to lose and everything to gain. And because you hate him, whether you admit it or not. The words struck deep, exposing truths Matt had buried beneath layers of denial. Hate didn't describe it fully. It was resentment, humiliation, the kind Victor inflicted by turning enemies into footnotes. Matt realized Jack wasn't offering partnership out of charity. He was offering him a place in a war Victor never saw coming. Jack extended a hand, a symbolic gesture, but one heavy with implications. Work with me. Let's burn down the kingdom Victor thinks he owns. Matt hesitated, not because he doubted Jack's intent, but because he feared the gravity of what he would be stepping into. But then he remembered Victor's smirk, his dismissals, his cruelty disguised as righteous authority. The humiliation, the lost opportunities, the destruction of his life's trajectory. Rage resurfaced like a dormant flame reigniting. With a deep breath, Matt took Jack's hand. A silent contract sealed. Jack's expression sharpened with satisfaction. He led Matt through the hidden facility, an underground safe house lined with encrypted communication systems and traceable vehicles, forged identities, and surveillance networks more advanced than anything Matt had imagined. This wasn't improvisation. This was infrastructure built for war. Jack had been preparing for something like this for a long time. This place is yours as long as you're with me, Jack said. No one will find you. Not Victor. Not the police. Not even your allies if you still have any. Matt felt a strange mix of empowerment and dread. He wasn't being rescued. He was being armed. Jack outlined the first phase of the plan: destabilize Victor emotionally, financially, strategically. Exploit the fractures within the Newman family. Turn allies into liabilities. Uncover secrets Victor buried even from himself. And when the time was right, strike at the very heart of Newman Enterprises. Matt listened, adrenaline simmering. This was far more intricate than anything he had ever orchestrated. Jack was constructing a blueprint for Victor's downfall, and Matt would be at the center of it. As the night deepened, the final image burned into the darkness was Jack's cold, smiliest smile that promised destruction, transformation, and war. And beside it, Matt's eyes reflected a new clarity, a dangerous acceptance of the path he had chosen. The plan to destroy Victor Newman had officially begun, and nothing in Genoa City would survive unchanged. Matt didn't remember the exact moment the world broke apart. He only remembered the feeling of it, the way the air seemed to disappear from his lungs as metal screamed against metal, as headlights split the night, and then everything became a blur of force and shattering glass. After that, everything existed in fragments. Pain came first, sharp and unforgiving, radiating from his ribs and skull like fire licking up through shattered beams. Cold followed, the kind of deep, invasive cold that made his fingers numb and his thoughts slow, as if his body had decided he didn't need clarity anymore. He was somewhere on the outskirts of Genoa City. He knew that much streets less familiar, the sky darker, the silence around him to complete. He tried to move, but every muscle protested, and when he attempted to drag himself away from the wreckage, his body buckled and he collapsed into the oily mix of dirt and broken glass. For a moment, lying there in the darkness, he thought this was it. Maybe this was the end he had always been heading toward alone, broken, swallowed by a town that did nothing but chew people up when they refused to play by the rules of those in power. Somewhere in the distance, he imagined sirens that never came, imagined footsteps that never approached. Time stretched in a painful loop until even fear became dull. He thought of Victor Newmanoff the way that man's shadow covered everything in Genoa City, of how every plan, every crime, every desperate move seemed to circle back to the same name. It infuriated him that even here, at the edge of death, Victor still existed in his mind like a judge waiting to sign the final verdict. He didn't hear the vehicle approach, only sensed the sudden presence of something new, a change in the air, a shift in the darkness. Heavy boots crunched glass. Someone moved with purpose, not panic, their movements confident, almost methodical. Matt tried to lift his head, but the pain spiked and the world blurred again. Then a figure loomed above him, faceless beneath a dark mask, the kind worn by people who didn't intend to be remembered. For a moment, Matt thought it was death itself, finally arriving to claim what was left. But the stranger didn't strike, didn't leave him to bleed out. Instead, gloved hands slid under his shoulders, lifting him with a strange mix of care and efficiency. Matt let out a strangled sound, halfway between a groan and a curse, but the masked man said nothing. He hoisted Matt's body as though he'd done this before, as though rescuing a broken man from nowhere was part of a plan, not an act of mercy. As Matt faded in and out, he felt the sensation of being carried, of doors opening, of the muted rumble of an engine. Somewhere in the haze, a thought flickered. Nobody rescues someone like him without wanting something in return. When he woke again, it was to stillness. A dim light flickered above him, not fluorescent, not hospital grade, but warmer, like a cheap lamp in a carefully guarded room. The air smelled of antiseptic layered over something metallic and sharp, as though blood and disinfectant had fought a quiet war and called it a truce. His body ached in dozens of places, ribs wrapped, arm bandaged, a dull pain throbbing behind his eyes. He turned his head slowly, expecting hospital walls, the steady beeping of monitors, the distant shuffle of nurses. Instead, he saw concrete, a ceiling with exposed beams, a small metal table lined with medical supplies that looked new but unbranded, a chair placed at the far wall, and in it, the same masked figure from the crash, sitting with an unsettling calm, hands folded, watching him. Matt swallowed, his throat dry, mind racing through possibilities. Was he a prisoner? A patient? A pawn? His instincts screamed at him not to trust this silence, this careful staging of safety. The figure stood when Matt tried to shift, crossing the room with measured strides. His presence was oddly controlled and threatening, not reassuring, something in between. Without a word, he checked Matt's bandages, adjusted the 4-line attached to his arm, and pressed a cool cloth to his forehead. The movements were precise, practiced, almost professional. Matt studied him, searching for Clush's posture, his build, his eyes. They were sharp but distant, the kind of eyes that analyzed, not empathized. It made the whole thing more unnerving. If this man had wanted him dead, he'd had countless chances by now. Instead, he kept Matt alive, patched up, and hidden. That could only mean one thing: he had plans. Days blurred together in a cycle of painkillers, evaluation, and silence. Whenever Matt surfaced enough to ask where he was or why, the masked man remained wordless, answering only with subtle gestures or clinical adjustments. But despite the lack of conversation, trust began to grow at the type-born of affection, but the reluctant recognition that this stranger had saved his life and continued to preserve it. The wounds that had once felt like open flames cooled into deep aches. The dizziness faded. He could sit up without the room spinning wildly out of control. Little by little, Matt's survival instinct morphed into sharpened curiosity. He replayed the accident over and over in his mini-timing, the trajectory, the force. It hadn't felt random. It had felt orchestrated. And if someone had orchestrated his near-death, then someone had also orchestrated his rescue. That realization settled over him like a thin layer of ice. The turning point came when the masked man entered the room one evening with a different energy, still composed, but with a strange finality in the way he stood at the foot of the bed. Matt knew something was coming. The man's hands moved toward his face, fingers sliding beneath the edge of the mask. For a moment, Matt's heartbeat pounded in his ears. Then the mask came off, and the identity beneath it rewrote everything. Jack Abbott. The name flashed through Matt's mind with the force of a slap. Jack Abbott, father, businessman, rival, the perpetual thorn in Victor Newman's side. A man known for charm and righteous anger, for corporate wars fought in boardrooms and courtrooms, not in dark safehouses. He was one of Genoa City's pillars, a man who represented legacy and family even when the foundation beneath him cracked. Seeing him here, stripped of public polish, standing in a hidden bunker with the residue of secrecy clinging to his shoulders, was like seeing a ghost step out of a mirror. Matt stared at him, stunned, trying to reconcile the image he'd always held of Jack with the reality of this moment. Jack met his stare without flinching. There was no soft smile, no attempt at immediate explanation or comfort. His eyes were cool, steady, carrying something heavier than anger, something closer to resolve. For a long beat, neither man spoke. It was Jack who finally broke the silence, not with flattery or an apology, but with a simple truth that cut straight to the bone. They had both suffered under the shadow of the same man. Jack didn't spin a flowery story. He didn't need to. He laid out the facts with a brutal, almost clinical clarity. Victor Newman had brought pain to both their lives again and again. To Jack, Victor was the architect of a lifetime of sabotage, stolen deals, broken dreams, manipulations that reached into the fabric of his family, the Abbotts. To Matt, Victor was the silent overlord who treated him as collateral damage in a much larger game, a man whose name was stamped on every closed door, every failed attempt at reclamation, every humiliation disguised as justice. Different histories, same gravitational pull. In one way or another, Victor had shaped the worst parts of both of their stories. Jack spoke of decisions made in boardrooms that never made the headlines, of quiet threats passed off as business, of systematic dismantling of lives that dared to cross the Newman agenda. He described opportunities that vanished without explanation, allies that suddenly turned, legal battles that seemed to bend around Victor's will. The more he spoke, the more Matt felt his own experiences clicking into place, like puzzle pieces that had been scattered separately but were always part of the same picture. Victor hadn't just fought them as opponents. He had made sure they never forgot they were beneath him. Then Jack's tone shifted, losing whatever remained of restraint. He said they were standing at a crossroads, that Genoa City had been under Victor's thumb for too long, that the cost of his continued dominance was being paid in people, not just money. He insisted that as long as Victor remained untouchable, no one truly had freedom, not in business, not in family, not in any attempt to start over. For Jack, this wasn't about a single rivalry. It was about ending the reign of a man who believed himself invincible. And for that, he needed someone who existed outside the usual lines, someone Victor wouldn't see coming, someone who had already been written off by most of the town. He needed Matt. Jack didn't disguise the danger of what he was proposing. He didn't pretend it was noble or clean. He laid out the framework of his plan with the same precision he might use to describe a complex acquisition aesthetic. Layered, ruthless. It was not about public exposure, not about dragging Victor through a courtroom or another scandal that he'd somehow survive. This time, Jack spoke in terms Victor wasn't supposed to walk away from. An accident re-engineered. A moment of vulnerability created by careful manipulation of schedules and security. A scenario where Victor would be alone at exactly the wrong time, in exactly the wrong place, with exactly the wrong person positioned nearby. That person would not be Jack. It would not be any member of his family. It would be Matt Clark, a man already smeared by reputation, a ghost among the living, someone nobody would think twice about blaming or never get the chance to. But Jack wasn't careless. He stressed that the plan was designed to shield Matt from suspicion to ensure that, if executed correctly, Matt would walk away behind a wall of alibis and manufactured innocence. There would be decoys, misinformation, evidence trails pointing in other directions. Matt wouldn't be the weapon the world saw. He'd be the hand behind the curtain that no one knew to look for. Jack promised him safe houses, clean identities, money, and a map out of the cycle he'd been trapped in for years. In exchange, Matt had to do the one thing others had tried and failed to do: take Victor Newman off the board permanently. The weight of the choice slammed into Matt with a force almost worse than the crash. Revenge had always been a quiet, smoldering ember inside him when it came to Victor, a low burn of resentment. A fantasy he never fully allowed himself to indulge because he knew how it ended for people who tried. They disappeared. They lost everything. They were crushed beneath the machinery of Victor's power. And yet here he was, offered a chance not just to strike back, but to end the story of Victor once and for all. It wasn't just revenge. It was annihilation. And it was being offered by someone who knew Victor's weaknesses better than almost anybody alive. But there was another side to it, a whisper beneath the roar. If he said yes, there was no coming back. Whatever twisted redemption he still clung to would be gone. He would cross a line he couldn't uncross, not in this life, not in whatever came after. He saw flashes of face people whose lives orbited Victor's gravitational pull, some willingly, some not. Nick, Sharon, Victoria, even people who'd been hurt by Victor but still loved him in ways Matt couldn't understand. Taking Victor out wouldn't just end a tyrant. It would fracture an entire network of people who'd built their lives, their traumas, their identities around him. Victor's destruction would leave a crater, and the town would never be the same. Jack didn't pressure him. He simply watched, letting the storm of conflict rage silently across Matt's face. He offered him something most people in Genoa City had never given, a choice. Matt could walk away. Jack would keep him hidden, give him a chance to disappear, to take whatever remained of his life and rebuild it somewhere beyond Victor's reach. No war, no assassination, no blood under his nails. He could accept a quieter existence, something less than revenge but maybe more than ruin. Or he could step into a role that would define him forever as the man who finally ended Victor Newman's rule. In the quiet that followed, Matt felt his mind and heart pulling in different directions. One side saw the practical danger, the irreversible moral stain, the endless consequences. The other saw all the nights spent railing against a fate he never chose, all the times he'd been cornered, punished, dismissed, labeled irredeemable by people who sat comfortably behind Victor's shield. The memory of lying on the ground after the crash, bleeding and alone, thinking that if he died there nobody would care, pressed against his ribs like a bruise. Victor had helped build that feeling, brick by brick, with each decision that treated Matt as expendable. And now Jack was offering him a way to take back something from that injustice, even if the cost was everything he had left of himself. Matt looked around the safe house with monitors, the secure lines, the carefully prepared files Jack had compiled on Victor's movements, security details, vulnerabilities. He saw the depth of preparation, the years of observation, the obsession shaped into strategy. This wasn't a wild impulse. This was the culmination of a long, bitter war. When he finally raised his eyes to Jack's, there was no more uncertainty in them, only the hard clarity of a man who had stepped past the point of no return. He chose. He chose against peace, against anonymity, against the fantasy of quietly moving on. He chose the storm. With a slow, deliberate nod, Matt accepted the affirmative just as a desperate man clinging to relevance, but as someone who understood exactly what he was signing away. Jack's expression shifted almost imperceptibly into joy, but into grim satisfaction, like a general watching the final piece slide into place on a battlefield map. There were no handshakes or dramatic words. There didn't need to be. The agreement existed in the space between them, weighty and charged. From that moment, the bunker ceased to be a sanctuary and became a war room. Jack walked him through the finer points of the plan, never lingering long enough on any detail to make it feel like instruction in a textbook, but long enough that Matt understood the stakes. They studied Victor's routines, noting every guard rotation, every driver, every moment when the great man allowed himself to be alone. They discussed weather patterns, routes, glitches, insecurity that could be nudged into becoming fatal flaws. But underneath all of that, there was a core principle guiding Jack's design. Victor had to believe he was untouchable up until the last second. Only then would he be vulnerable. Only then would he fall. As days turned into nights and back again inside that windowless space, Matt felt himself changing. The wounds on his body hardened into scars. The fragility in his movements gave way to a hardened precision. He felt stronger, more focused, but also more hollow, as if parts of his humanity were being traded piece by piece for the ability to do what he had agreed to. Sometimes, in the quiet moments when Jack left him alone with his thoughts, he wondered if he had condemned himself. Other times, when he thought of Victor's smug certainty, he felt a dark exhilaration that frightened him with its intensity. When the preparations finally reached their tipping point, Jack stood once more across from him, mask in hand to wear this time, but to offer. From this moment on, his eyes seemed to say, even if his lips didn't, you are no longer simply Matt Clark, the man who got caught in Victor's wake. You are the storm Victor never believed would reach him. Matt took the mask not because he enjoyed the disguise, but because he understood what it meant. He was stepping out of the wreckage and into something far more dangerous than a car crash. He was stepping into a destiny forged out of bitterness, pain, and a battered longing for justice that had turned into something darker. Somewhere in Genoa City, Victor Newman moved through his day with the same unshakable confidence that had defined him for decades. Unaware that to men he had pushed too far were now assembling the means to erase him. Somewhere, Nick continued his own fight for recovery. Sharon wrestled with fear. The Newmans and Abbotts circled their old battles, and the town itself hummed as though nothing had changed. But everything had. Matt Clark had chosen war, and the first step of the plan to end Victor Newman had already begun, quietly. In a secret bunker where a wounded man had accepted a role that would either destroy his enemy or consume him completely.